So
Jolie's here.
yeah, look at all these wonderful faces, and some faces I know and some people I haven't met yet. So I'm looking forward to meeting you guys, and I'm really looking forward to you guys meeting Heather. Oh, you are not going to be disappointed today. She is awesome. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we turn the floor over to Heather. But if you look on the bottom of your screen, chances are most of you have been on Zoom webinars and calls before, especially now with COVID and we're all going remote these days. But just in case, if you look at the bottom left of your screen, you're going to see a mute button. And as of right now, I have everybody muted just so that we can give Heather the full respect and not goodness, and not interrupt her like my phone just did. And so you'll also see a stop video on there. So we are going to be recording this so that we can post it on our website and things like that for people who are not able to attend today. So if you don't want your beautiful face on the recording, just press the stop video button, and that way your face will be protected. Something else to notice on there, hi Donna, welcome, is there is a chat button at the bottom as well. So I'll be running that chat room. So if you guys have questions for Heather as we go along, because there's going to be a lot of probably questions for her, put them right in there so we don't necessarily interrupt Heather, but that way I can kind of filter and funnel them to her at the right time. All right, so don't be afraid to use that. And without further ado, I want you guys to meet Heather Ratliff. So she, for those of you who are in the Southwest Michigan area, you might know her as the Wellness RN. And she comes from a background of functional medicine as well as health coaching. Oh my goodness, I'm so excited she's here. I had the opportunity, actually I've had a couple opportunities to hear her speak, and every single time I have left thinking, I want to be Heather. Like, how do I get to be Heather someday? Because she is so smart and she's so charismatic, and I guarantee you're going to take away some amazing information today to make yourself better. So without further ado, Heather, the floor is yours.
Okay. Give me a thumbs up, Ellen. Can you hear me? Yep. Okay. So great. My name is Heather Ratliff, and I'm a registered nurse, and I do this thing called functional medicine. And for those of you who don't know, functional medicine is also called root cause medicine. So say someone comes in with a complaint like a headache, instead of trying to give them a medication to make the headache go away, we try to figure out, why are you having the headaches? Like, what can we do to make the root cause of the headache go away? Whether that's, a food sensitivity, whether it's musculoskeletal, if it's a mitochondrial or energy production problem, those things all could come into play, for instance, in creating headaches. So we try to figure out the why, like the constant why is our goal in functional medicine, to get at the root cause of conditions. So actually Carrie Palmer's on the webinar today. She's another functional medicine practitioner in the area. So she's a why asker as well. And in my functional medicine practice, I see a variety of conditions. People do come in with headaches. I see a lot of people struggling with, gut disorders, whether they can't poop or maybe they poop too much, a lot of bloating, indigestion, a lot of thyroid problems. But I would say of all of those things, the complaint that probably tops everything is fatigue. People complain about fatigue as either a primary symptom, like that may be what drives them to the clinic, or it could be one of the many symptoms that bring them in. And people talk to me about fatigue in extremely different ways. Some people talk about it like it's a somatic or a body thing, where they're like, it's so hard for me to just hold up a book. Like a book would be too heavy for me to hold in my arms. They get so tired. And some people are like, oh, no, it's not in my limbs at all. Like I can use my limbs, but it's my eyeballs. Like the fatigue is just in my eyeballs. If I could just keep my eyeballs closed, I would be so much happier. Other people are obsessed with sleep. Like that is how fatigue manifests for them. They wake up in the morning, the first thing they think about is, when can I go back to sleep? And that's really all they think about all day, is when can I find the next break in this day where I can lay my head down and get sleep. Some people, it's more of a motivational issue. There are things that they know they love to do, that they have always loved to do, and they've been able to do and execute through their entire life. And suddenly this fatigue thing actually comes upon them and they can't do things, even the things that they love to do, let alone, all the awful things that we have to do in life, like wash dishes, the things that we don't want to do. So it's a motivation thing for some people. And for some people, it's brain fog, which most people kind of talk about as this kind of curtain of spider webs that happen. They feel like here kind of in the foreground of their brain. And brain fog for a lot of people confuses execution. Like they're like, I know what I need to do. And like, God, taking the steps to do it just feels impossible to me. So for a lot of people, it's the execution. Concentration and focus are really affected by this thing called brain fog as well. And then for some people, it's really a mood issue. For some people, fatigue really feels like a depressed mood. And for other people, it's actually the opposite. It's a sense of agitation and frustration and anger. So I love working with fatigue and helping with people with fatigue, because if you think about it, say someone does come in for a headache, for instance, and they get headaches pretty frequently, like maybe they get like a bad headache once a week and it lasts 24 hours, like they are knocked out, like they're out of commission for, once a week, every single week, they're out of commission for a full day, which is, like that is life altering. But when I think about people with fatigue, and especially if they have pervasive fatigue that kind of affects them throughout their day and their life, that affects them every day, all day. And it affects every single thing that we do, because it affects your career, right? If you can't stay awake at work, you can't get ahead in the job, it affects your career. It certainly affects your relationships. Think about the times when you've been tired and you've engaged in a conversation with somebody, and let's just say like a partner or a parent or a child, someone you're really close with, maybe even a coworker or your boss, and you say something that you're like, I really didn't want to say that, but I said it out of frustration or irritation or grumpiness because I didn't sleep the last couple nights. So it can really affect your relationships with other human beings in the world, which is probably the most important asset that we have as humans, is our capacity to engage with others and find fulfillment there. So it affects that. It affects our financial decisions. Let's just talk for a minute about this idea of willpower. So we use willpower all day long to behave appropriately. Like I notice, everybody who is willing to show their actual live face, it seems like you're all dressed, you're not exposing yourself to us. Thank you. We're behaving appropriately, right? Yeah, exactly. So we follow like a very strict social structure in our world about what's appropriate and what's not, how you behave in relationships, how you behave at work. All are things that we do all day long that exhaust this thing called willpower, which is something that is, again, in this execution part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex. And as we are fatigued, literally, our capacity to engage in willpower decreases. So we are less likely to do hard things. Like we are less likely to go the extra mile on that project to get the promotion. We're less likely to keep that promise we made to ourselves to eat well today. We're less likely to lift the extra hard weight if we even get to exercise at all. So being able to care for ourselves in a very complicated world that we live in requires willpower, and willpower is deeply depleted by fatigue. So being able to coach people and make people be well, it requires them to not have a massive amount of fatigue in their life, because they have to execute regularly and consistently to get the results that they want from the intervention that we're using to help make them well, and to get the outcome that they want in their life. So it is, I think fatigue is maybe the most incapacitating of everything that people talk to me about, because it affects every single aspect of someone's life, from career, money, finances, creativity, across the board. So I love helping people manage fatigue. So I have a lot of really smart patients. And so when people come in and I do an intake interview with a new patient, The first thing I do is I spend a full hour with a patient trying to get their story. Everybody is unique. They have unique genetics. They have unique social and behavioral habits. They have unique exposures in their life to either illnesses or toxins. So getting their story is a deeply important part of this. And always, as part of their story, the thing that I start with is talking to them about sleep. Like, what is a good night of sleep for you? What does that look like? What's a bad night of sleep? What does that look like? Who's in the bed with you? Some people have just a partner. Some people have no one. Some people have a partner and 3 kids. Some people have a partner, 3 kids, and several dogs. So there are a lot of questions that we can ask people about their sleep habits that help us kind of get at this question primarily about fatigue. Fatigue is, it's a particular sort of suffering, right? Like, fatigue doesn't feel like pain necessarily. It doesn't feel like any other things that we suffer from. It's unique in its aspect, but it is also unique in that it can be relieved so easily by sleep, right? So if you're tired, particularly, I mean, some people have a deeper kind of fatigue, but for someone who's like, imagine you're driving down the road and you're exhausted and you're really want to like close your eyeballs while you're driving. Like, really all it would take is for you to pull off the road, and within minutes, that fatigue, that suffering would be abolished just by the application of sleep into the equation. So when I'm talking to people about fatigue, obviously the thing that I have to first address is, do you sleep? And do you sleep well? Do you sleep enough? And do you have quality sleep when you're sleeping? If we can't address that, then it's really hard to get into the deeper nitty gritty of fatigue if we can't really get to sleep as an issue. So sleep is obvious, but it's not the simplest thing for people to execute, right? It's easy, but not simple. It's easy to say, get more sleep. It's really hard for a lot of people to do that for a lot of reasons. There's 2 different kind of like fields that I put people in who are not getting enough sleep. There are some people who intentionally don't get enough sleep. They're just short sleepers. Some people just don't want to go to bed, right? And this particularly occurs with people who are night owls, which we believe there is an actual genetic component to your chronobiology. That's what we call this idea of being either a morning person or a night owl. It's your chronobiology. And we think that is really particularly a genetic based thing. We can alter it some, but genetically we seem predisposed to either being a morning or a night person. So people who are short sleepers, but who live in the culture of the United States of America, typically have to get up first thing in the morning and go to work, right? So people who are night owls suffer pretty significantly because they don't get enough sleep night after night after night after night. They can't fall asleep before 11, 12, 1, in the morning. So they struggle when that alarm goes off at 6:30 or 7 to have had enough sleep in their night, night after night, even if they sleep well. The worst person in my experience is someone who is a night owl, but also an introvert, and they have a family or they have a big job, because they want everyone in their family to go to bed. And then they want to stay up because then they need that me time to decompress, right? They can't do that in the morning because that's when they sleep soundly. So they have to decompress at night after everybody else goes to bed. And so then their hours, they spend 2 hours by themselves, which is what they really need to feel well. But then that even shortens sleep more. So, those people in particular, I think there is a huge need for those people. We think about 30% of the population are genetically night owls. Those people should consider a conversation with the people in their lives, whether that's at home or at work, to figure out how to push their day to start a little bit later. Because genetic biology is so deeply involved in that. So short sleepers got a hard time of it, but then there's also obviously insomnia. So, insomnia in many instances is caused by the consumption of stimulants, and everybody's favorite stimulant, mine included, is caffeine. And I have a cup of coffee pretty much every day, sometimes more. And I sleep pretty well, but really, honestly, I should probably just give up coffee. So I'm here in the trenches with y'all, not shouting at you, but here working with you. But anyway, caffeine has a long half-life for some people, which means it stays in the body for a long time. So it can actually accumulate day after day after day after day of use and stay in the body for a long time. So, if I was doing a sleep intervention with somebody where I was going to try to help them get more sleep, certainly we would talk about getting caffeine and alcohol. Are probably, alcohol is not a stimulant, it's actually a mood suppressant. So, that, you know, those two things in combination with each other, a morning stimulation and then kind of the dulling of things in the afternoon or evening, can cause people to have poor sleep over the course of the night. So we would consider as an intervention getting those things out of the system. So let me just talk a little bit. It's important to address this idea of melatonin because people ask this question a lot. What is melatonin and how does it work in the body? We have these two hormones that kind of take over at different times of the day. We have a hormone that peaks first thing in the morning, and that's called cortisol. And cortisol is like your get up, we're gonna get out there, we're gonna get it done, all right, let's go. And then we have this other hormone that peaks at night, not in the morning, and that is melatonin. And melatonin is like it's time right now. You got to get yourself in bed. You got to go to sleep. This is night. So these kind of two hormones set up our clock. We have a circadian rhythm or a daily diurnal cycle where we're up in the morning. Most people, this is the case, up in the morning with their elevated cortisol levels, which, slowly dives throughout the day versus, that melatonin level, which starts really low throughout the day and increases at night. So, it's the clock. These things are the clock. These tell us when it's time to be awake, and these tell us when it's time to go to sleep. So if sleep onset is the issue for you, like you can't fall asleep and at an early enough time, then the use of melatonin probably could be very helpful for that because it's the signal to sleep. People who wake later in the night don't usually have as much success with the application of melatonin as a supplement, although, there's a lot of variability in human chemistry, so that may happen. So now that we're talking, let's actually take a little break. Is there anything in the chat or do people have questions about sleep in particular?
We do have one that somebody had mentioned earlier. They were talking to me about sleep and they wanted to see if you would comment on what kind of the duration ideal, because there's a lot of variability for what people think, how long should they sleep? And then there was some questions about blue light.
Yeah, right. So, okay, let's first talk about the question about how long do I need to sleep? And really, the answer to that is variable. Somewhere between 7 and 9 hours is what typically people need to sleep. And the way that you can figure that out is if you get enough sleep that you can wake without an alarm, if you can get going in your day without coffee or some other stimulant, and if you don't get sleepy in the morning, particularly, in the morning we have our cortisol levels are still pretty high, so we shouldn't be getting sleepy in the morning. It's in the afternoon when those levels start to drop along with this circadian rhythm. So there's more of a natural lull in the afternoon alertness compared to the morning. So if you can get up in the morning without an alarm, and wake, some people just don't even wake rested. Some people have said the very worst part of my day is getting myself out of bed. Like they're like, it's horrible. But for a typical person who's not dealing with pathology around either sleep or fatigue, if you can get yourself out of bed, if you can make it through that morning without caffeine, and if you can stay alert throughout the course of the morning, that's typically a good sign you're getting enough sleep. So I would definitely pay attention to those. Now let's talk a little bit about light. Humans are living in a light environment that we are not adapted to as a species. If you think about it, our ancestors were woken to bright light every day, and they stayed in the bright light until it got to be evening, and then they were in complete darkness. And we do kind of the opposite, right? Like we wake up, sometimes in the winter, of course, we don't wake up based on when it gets light. We wake up based on when our alarm clock goes off and we have to be somewhere. So in the winter in particular, we wake up in the dark. even during the summer when it's bright outside, we're not outside when we wake up. We're in a house, which has a significant reduction in lumens, even when we have our lights on in the house. Like every foot away from the window or from direct sunlight that you get is like a exponential decrease in the amount of light that you're receiving, the number of lumens that are received on the back of your eyeballs. So so in the morning, that bright light is actually, believe it or not, at the complete opposite time of the day. The time when we initiate melatonin production is first thing in the morning when our eyeballs see that daily light and we're exposed to it. So if someone's having trouble with, I know chronobiology does play a lot of role in being able to become sleepy at night, but so do many habitual things. Exposure to light at the wrong time of day is certainly something that can alter our sleep patterns, as can eating at non-typical times of the day. So, exposure to natural light early in the day can help with melatonin production. Like imagine you're at the beach, right? And someone's like, oh my gosh, I was at the beach all day and all I did was lay around. Like I didn't do anything. But then when you get home, you're just pooped and you sleep great that night, even though you didn't do much. That exposure to sunlight throughout the day could have altered the melatonin production in the body. So exposure to light in the morning really helps. And then then we do this opposite thing that our ancestors did, right? Like when it got dark, we'd have to go to sleep. Like there wasn't a lot we could do, right? But instead, this is when we like take our screens and we put them like this far away from our face. And we put this bright light right in our eyeballs. And so we're exposing ourselves during, non-daylight hours to continuous sources of light, particularly from screens, including, television screens, computer screens, and our phones. So yes, this alters our capacity to engage in sleep onset as well. So certainly a lot of people buy blue blocker sunglasses or glasses on Amazon. You can look them up and they're $20 or whatever. And so if you're exposed to blue light late in the day, it can be a fantastic thing to use those to block particularly the activating blue light spectrum so that your body is getting that signal towards sleep. So those are, I think, answers those two questions about sleep. Is there anything else, Ellen?
You got one more. So let's say somebody has been using melatonin for a while. Can you actually overuse melatonin and affect your body's actual natural production of it?
I don't know the actual answer to that. I've heard things in both camps, but I've never actually looked at the scientific research on that. It makes sense to me that if you're constantly dumbing down that receptor site, that if there's a feedback mechanism, you might not need to make as much. But I don't know the actual answer to that, sorry. But if someone wants, I can do the research. If someone wants to contact me, I can look into it.
Perfect. I think that was it. At least if anybody's got other questions, keep dropping them in the chat, but we'll let Heather fly.
Okay, so then we have these other systems that contribute to energy production in the body. And like the easiest way for me to explain it is to talk about how you get an airplane to take off safely. So, and let's think about that airplane taking off safely as us launching ourselves into our day. There's three kind of different things that you need to have happen. One is like air traffic control, right? And they're the ones who are telling you it's safe to fly. It's time for you to fly right now. The other one is we need a flight plan, and that flight plan tells us kind of like the how high we're going to fly to stay safe, like how big to go, right? And then the third thing we need is like we need jet fuel to get that plane off the ground. And so when I think about the three systems of energy production in our body that help us get off the ground every day, it's the system of cortisol, which is what I've talked about already. That's like the air traffic controllers. They're like, it is day, Roger, you're clear to fly. So that's our clock, right? That tells us it's daytime, and this is the time during the day when we should have energy. I also think about our thyroid, which is a gland that lives right here in your neck, and it controls our metabolism or our capacity. It tells every cell in the body how much to do its job. or it tells like the plane how high to fly, right? So the thyroid tells the body to increase or decrease its execution of its job, whatever its job is. So and then the last thing that we need to do is like, we need to get some jet fuel in that engine. We need to do some internal combustion. We got to fly, right? We got to make energy. And the place that happens in our body is in the mitochondria. And the mitochondria are these itty bitty, teeny tiny subcellular structures that live in every single cell in our body. We have thousands of them. And the mitochondria is literally the place in the body where we turn food into fuel. So it's like it's the engine. If instead of having one massive engine in our mitochondria, we have gobs of engines. Like we have 10 trillion human cells, and there's 1,000 mitochondria in every cell. Like that's a massive number of mitochondria. We in fact think that these itty bitty subcellular structures that are teeny tiny make up fully 10% of our body mass. So just like an engine in a car would take up some percent, or those engines on that jet plane take up 50% of the plane's weight or whatever, we have 10% of our body is our engine that turns food into fuel. It just happens in these itty bitty, teeny tiny subcellular structures that are everywhere in every cell in the body, whether it's a neuron in your brain, whether it's the retina in your eyeball, whether it's the fingernail growers that live right here, it doesn't matter where it is. Every single cell in our body, except for a couple types, have these mitochondria that help us generate energy. And so, like there's things can go wrong in all three of these cascades in terms of energy production. And so, the thyroid is something that's typically seen in traditional medicine as something that contributes to energy production. So, if you were to go to your typical standard doctor, like they would maybe consider even doing a thyroid test. They don't always test the full thyroid cascade, which includes making the thyroid hormone, which then gets converted into a usable form. And then that usable form sits on top of a receptor on the cell and plugs into that cell and says, go. So there's several steps in that cascade that can be tested. And most doctors don't typically test that. So they typically just look mostly at that, at just the production of the thyroid hormone right from the gland. So if you're looking for additional testing and you don't have a doctor that can do that, you can go to Amazon even now. There's a lot of direct to consumer testing that's available, and like a lab called ZRT, you can buy a kit on Amazon now and for $150 and get your own thyroid tested without having to go through a doctor. If you can't get the doctor to help you look at both the thyroid stimulating hormone T3 and T4. And a lot of people also have an autoimmune disease of the thyroid called Hashimoto's thyroiditis or autoimmune thyroiditis. And that's something that online test would also test for if you were interested in doing that. People who struggle with thyroid issues or this flight plan, like how much energy, how much does my cell need to do what it should do, struggle obviously with fatigue. They also struggle with being cold. They have oftentimes constipation. Their bowel is like not moving things fast enough. Like it's literally slowing down like the rest of their body. They have dry skin, oftentimes unexplained weight gain. Sometimes they get puffy, like either in their face or edema in their ankles, but a lot of times they wake up with like really huge puffy things under their eyes. They can be really hoarse in their throat because the thyroid can be enlarged and actually altering some of the how the voice box works in there. And then also another thing to think about clinically is depression. The thyroid really helps support mood management and managing cholesterol levels. So, if you're feeling like this might be you're someone who's got a slow bowel and a slow mood and your cholesterol's up for some reason, even though your diet hasn't changed, you might really consider talking to your doctor about getting your thyroid checked, because there's some evidence there that could be the problem.
Sorry to interrupt you. Before you get too far away from the mitochondria,
yeah,
we had a question about what is the best way to feed and fuel our mitochondria?
Yeah, actually, I was gonna actually come back to the mitochondria, so we'll get to that, but for sure. So anyway, so there are certainly some things you can do to support thyroid function. One of the things that I like, I'll offer a thyroid supplement that has like some of the nutrients that you need to be able to run these cascades in the body. But one thing that's really important that people don't think about and that's hard to overcome is that remember that every cell in our body has that receptor site for that thyroid hormone that sits in there and tells that cell how much to do what it wants to do. Um, if we don't exercise very well, this this the affinity of the thyroid hormone, like in that receptor site, is not super strong. So it's kind of like wafts around it. Yeah, receptor site, there you are. Okay, I'll settle in here. The more we exercise, the more receptive that site becomes to that hormone. So it's really helpful to push yourself. In some instances, again, this is someone who doesn't have pathology of fatigue, like chronic fatigue syndrome. But for people who are just struggling with fatigue, like it is kind of a downward spiral. Like it is this feed forward cycle, because the less you exercise, the less this works, right? That cascade isn't as effective. So and that makes you want to not exercise because you're fatigued, and then it happens even more and more. So we want to be careful of that feed forward cycle. So some thyroid supplements can be great. And also I would think about trying to increase exercise. Yeah, so let's talk briefly about cortisol, which is that kind of get up and go hormone. Um, you know, this is something that is not tested in traditional medicine. The way it's tested in functional medicine is usually through saliva or through urine. Um, so that's something to consider. Again, you can do a cortisol test. Remember, this is the clock to see if your clock is working. And you can do that again if you look up ZRT cortisol salivary test on Amazon, you can find a test kit there. Anyway, but these people do experience fatigue. They have poor recovery from exercise typically. Some people, like their cortisol levels are low enough in their body that they actually get some GI symptoms like nausea and vomiting, a lot of headache, and sometimes body pain. So if that's someone who sounds like you, then, what are some things we could do to manage cortisol levels in the body? And when people think about cortisol, they almost always think about psychosocial stress. Like, I don't have enough money. I don't have enough time. My boss is an idiot. Like I can't, my kids are trouble. Like all these things, like I don't have the finances to pay the bills. These are true, real psychosocial stressors that cause the release of cortisol to manage this. But also at the same time, other things that we have happen in our body, we release cortisol then as well as this stress management technique. So if you don't get enough sleep for a night, your cortisol levels will be elevated to deal with the demand of that sleep debt. If you have blood glucose dysregulation throughout the day, like you're eating a lot of sugar and your sugar's cascading up and down in your body, like that really annoys the body. Like it does not like that. And so the body sees that as kind of an emergency situation, even though some of us do it all the time, right? So the body's like, emergency, emergency, emergency. I'm having way too much sugar and the numbers are going up and down. I don't really like this. And so the body's like, I'm going to release some cortisol to manage this emergency of blood glucose dysregulation. So when we're thinking about what we can do to manage cortisol, to manage our clock, to make sure that's functioning properly, the air traffic controller of this whole sleep-wake cycle, definitely a meditation practice can so help with that. Breath work, the inhalation, exhalation breath work, managing your blood glucose levels, which means, reducing, there's three primary things that kind of push blood glucose dysregulation, and those are any kind of sugars, added sugars, natural sugars, and grains can be really, especially processed grains, and processed potatoes, which is like potato chips and French fries. So we call that, I didn't come up with this, but it's the GPS diet. So it's the grains, processed potatoes, and sugar diet. So you want to avoid those three things as much as you can if you're having fatigue, because it can really, cortisol dysregulation can be a part of that. So let me just go do some chatting about mitochondria. I am like a mitochondria nerd. I love the mitochondria. I'm fascinated by this idea of energy production, this jet fuel that launches us out into our day, where we, just like a jet engine, we do this conversion of food into, or fuel into, food into fuel. So I love the mitochondria. I love thinking about it. I love trying to optimize the mitochondria for people. And so the mitochondria is this place where we do this thing, turning food into fuel. Like, that sounds easy, right? Well, it's actually like 30 steps of crazy chemistry that like everybody who's ever taken biochemistry has had to memorize. So it's actually really hard to turn food into fuel. Like, that's not a super easy thing. And so there are a lot of nutrient deficiencies that can come into play if we're short on B vitamins, CoQ10, magnesium. There's like a kind of a big cascade of nutrients that are required to help us move this chemistry along to make ATP, which is our fuel in our body. So I really love to support people with a diet. And so this is a question that came up that can help support mitochondrial function. And so what we think is happening when people have some diet related mitochondrial stress is typically we have too much going through this chemical process. Imagine this is a conveyor belt where we're, along this whole conveyor belt of turning food into fuel. We got all these people and they're all doing a job, turning this into that and this into that. And then finally we've got fuel on the other end. Well, you can imagine if that conveyor belt of food to fuel was running too quickly, that all the processes that had to happen to get A to B can really get messed up. And so let's imagine that if you can't do your part, like that part just drops off, right? Like, oh, I try to do it. My job is, converting succinic acid into malic acid, but I couldn't do it because I didn't have the right resources. It was going too fast. There's too much going through this cascade. Something's going to drop off that conveyor belt and make a mess on the floor. And so we think that what's happening for a lot of people who struggle with mitochondrial deficits, who can't turn food into fuel very well, is they just have too much food going through this cascade all the time. So Americans eat constantly, right? We eat anything we want, pretty much. This is the standard American diet, to eat whatever we want, whenever we want, in the quantity that we want, right? So we can just like keep pushing energy through this cascade all day long. We snack, we eat big meals, we consume a lot of beverages that have a lot of calories in them. And so all those things together can cause a lot of damage to happen in that conveyor belt of energy production that causes a mess to happen in the mitochondria. And not only that, but we don't have time then to fix the machinery, right? So if we're constantly plugging food through this machinery, we never have time to come in and tinker and make sure it's working well. That's a process in the body called autophagy, where our body is very happily goes in and takes apart things that aren't working very well and replaces them with things that are working better. So you can imagine if you're running food through that cascade constantly and we never have time to repair it, that there's a lot of damaged mitochondria in our body that can't do their job. So here's what happens is we get tired. And then just like with the thyroid, once we're tired, we don't want to move, right? And so our body's like, you know what? These mitochondria are really hard to make. I gave you 1,000 of them last week. I really thought you wanted 1,000 of them, but all you did was sit on the couch. So I'm not going to give you 1,000 of those anymore. Like, that is too many. You're clearly not using them. I'm going to give you 800. And so now we have 800 mitochondria to run all this food through. And so there's more damage. So you can see, again, we have this feed forward cycle that can make us feel worse and worse and worse and worse with fatigue. So my favorite way to support people with mitochondrial health is to put them on a much lower carbohydrate diet, especially the simple sugars. There's a lot of really good fats that can help the mitochondria heal as well. We need a high nutrient diet because, like I said, all that chemistry that goes through The system has to be supported by nutrients like the B vitamins and CoQ10 and magnesium, alpha lipoic acid. There's a whole bunch of things. And so the more real food that we eat, the more likely we are to support that mitochondrial cascade so that we can make the energy that we need.
Heather, just off of that, somebody asked specifically, is that one of the reasons why, or would you recommend specifically the keto-based diet to reset the system, especially when you've been flooding the conveyor belts, is what they were asking?
Yeah, so some people might not know what the ketogenic diet is. So the ketogenic diet is a diet where instead of using carbohydrates as the primary source for fuel, which carbohydrates include sugars and starches, fiber is also a carbohydrate, but we're not very good at breaking it down. So sugars and starches are the primary carbohydrates that we use to fuel ourselves, and they're fine. I mean, like, that's okay. Like, humans have done that for a million years or whatever, but we live in a culture where they're very accessible in a very processed form, and so they get into our system and we use them a lot because they taste delicious. So we keep using those carbohydrates and then backing up the system. So in my ketogenic diet would be a diet where we stop feeding the system so many carbohydrates and in fact really quite limit them, and instead eat a lot of fat. So some people would familiarize themselves with the Atkins diet from the 80s or 90s, which was a high fat, high protein diet, but a very low carbohydrate diet. And so this diet, we use fat for fuel in a process called ketogenesis. That's why it's called the keto diet. We can take apart fats and use some fat parts for fuel in the mitochondria instead. So yes, that's one way to help reset the mitochondria. Another fantastic way to help reset the mitochondria with diet is to just not eat. Some people do better not eating for a while rather than trying to sort out what to eat. So this is a process called fasting. You may have heard people talking about this, and there's extended fasting, which can last a day or two or three or more. Or there can be also some shorter fasts, which would be it's called time restricted feeding, where maybe you stop eating at 8 o'clock every night or 7 o'clock and you don't eat until 12 or 1 every day. And that does allow the mitochondria to start utilizing some of the backed up resources in there. Particularly a 24 to 36 hour fast, we really turn on that process of autophagy and start cleaning up some of that mitochondrial mess that's been made in there. So yes, I absolutely do recommend these two kinds of diets, both a time restricted feeding / fasting diet and a low carbohydrate diet to help people support mitochondrial function. And exercise also, this is kind of the same as the thyroid. This is the process of hormesis. Hormesis is that idea that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So when you put a stressor on a system, the system responds to that stressor and attempts to predict that will happen again and be ready for it in the future. So this is why when someone starts lifting weights, they get bigger muscles. It's the process of hormesis. Stress was placed on that bicep as you're doing a curl, and the body is like, okay, wow, you did that until it was completely exhausted. I better make that muscle stronger for next time. The same thing happens at the subcellular level in the mitochondria. If we can stress that mitochondria a little bit with this calorie restriction, with some exercise, even low temperatures like exposure to cold, like taking cold showers, can help people recover some mitochondrial function. I know it's a little crazy to think about those things, but if you think about it, all these things are uncomfortable, right? None of these things make you feel great. It's hard to do that last rep. It's really hard to do that last rep in the gym when your muscles are just shaking with fatigue. It's really hard to not eat. It's so much easier to just have a meal rather than restrict calories. And it's really not. It's so warm and comfortable and lovely to take a hot shower, and not so warm and comfortable and lovely to take a cool shower. But all of these things contribute to this process of hormesis, or strengthening of the mitochondria, to help us feel better in the future. So
Heather, with regards to that, somebody asked about cryotherapy.
Yeah, there definitely some cold therapy works. Some people sit in an ice bath, like literally, to help with mitochondrial biogenesis, which is like the idea of creating more mitochondrial mass in the body. So yes, absolutely, that can help, just literally being really cold. Yeah. So anyway, these are kind of the things I think about when someone comes in and they're looking to get some fatigue addressed in our clinic. These are the things that fascinate me and that I love helping people with, because like I said, fatigue alters our capacity to do everything. And I feel like my job as a clinician in the world is to help you become the person that you were supposed to be here, the person of your dreams, right? Like I want you to be able to execute and thrive so that you can be the person who does the good work in the world. So I'm open to questions if you guys have more questions. And you can, I don't know, Ellen, if you want to turn on the mics if people want to ask a question.
Let me unmute everybody here. Might not be able to do that totally. Looks
That's
like,
okay.
Sorry, everybody. If you do have any questions, though, you can unmute yourself, or you're welcome to write those in the chat. So one question that I know that some other people had mentioned to me was if they're struggling with fatigue and they want to go down the hormone route. When people have asked me a little bit about this, I highly recommend talking to somebody like you who's a professional, because I think it gets pretty darn complicated. Right?
Yeah.
So if somebody wanted to do, not just that, but if they wanted to get your opinion on their personal fatigue or conditions or their why of some of the symptoms they might be feeling, how do they get a hold of you?
Yeah. So I have a website, the Wellness RN. They can go there and contact me through the Wellness RN. There's a contact me there link that you can click on. Yeah, hormones are really funny. Like, we don't tend to think about it, but when someone's like, I think it's my hormones, they're usually talking about estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. But the thyroid produces a hormone, and the adrenal glands produce a hormone, so cortisol and T4 are also hormones, and they all play together. Insulin is a hormone. We didn't talk about insulin, but that's a fascinating link between mitochondrial health and cortisol and men's and women's health hormones. So, what we eat really can alter so many different cascades in the body. We don't tend to think about it, but there's a pretty significant link between elevated sugar, carbohydrate consumption, the stress hormone cortisol, insulin resistance, prediabetes, diabetes, dysfunction in the women's health cascade, and mitochondrial damage. So like all those things are literally connected, which is just so crazy to think about, but they are. So we don't typically, when someone comes in, we don't typically, if they're like, I just need my hormones checked, like if they came in, we wouldn't just give them a hormone. Like we wouldn't give them.
Why do you think you should have your hormones checked?
Well, we try to figure out like what's causing the hormone dysregulation, like what's the why behind the hormone dysregulation, because it really could just be insulin, right? It could be some of these other things that we've talked about. So if someone comes in for hormone help, we usually start them on a really clean diet, which is super boring. But it can make a huge difference for people. But there are also tests we can do to look at hormone metabolism, men's and women's health hormone metabolism throughout the body. So yeah, it is really complicated. I feel like the more I know, the less I know, it's just, I keep learning. There's more to know.
Yeah. And then you realize, oh my goodness, if I know now this, that means I don't know that. And
yeah, it is. Yeah.
We had another couple great questions about any supplements in particular you might recommend, because there's probably a whole lecture you could do on those, right? But it may be any general stuff that you might recommend, or just some kind of good starters. And then what are your thoughts on the long-term keto diet? This person says, I've seen lots of different studies saying it's unhealthy long-term, and others are saying that it's safe. What are your thoughts?
So in terms of supplements, at our clinic, we have a supplement store and an online supplement store. And, those are amazing because you can get supplements that have been vetted a little bit. So the supplements in this country are regulated by the Consumer Product Safety Commission, not the FDA. And so if I wanted to make a bottle of supplements, I could do it. I could make supplements. I don't have to be a drug manufacturer to make supplements. I could just be a supplement manufacturer. And the person that would control the quality of my supplement manufacturing process is no oversight, no external oversight. Like, I would be my own quality control person. So if I told you I was going to put a bunch of melatonin in a tablet, I could either do that or not, because who's going to check it, right? So when you buy supplements, be absolutely sure to buy supplements at a health food store or at a clinic. I would not buy supplements at like a CVS. Like, they've done studies on some of those, like the things that are at Walgreens or Target. And the active ingredient that they say in there is not in there in the concentration that they said it was in there. So I think that's why so many supplement studies are very conflicting, is, if you're like, let's see if it works to take vitamin D for bone health or whatever, where is that vitamin D coming from? Who's the one that's managing and maintaining the quality of that? Is there a third party oversight on the quality of that? So really, supplements absolutely should be purchased from a quality source, like a health food store at minimum. So, and yeah, there are some name brands of supplements that I really like, but I don't think they're mostly accessible except through the supplement store. But I'm sure at one of the health food stores, if you asked for mitochondrial support, they would be able to offer you that. Thyroid support, the same. So I'm sure they have something there locally that you could buy. Otherwise, you'd have to, establish care with a provider to be able to get. Our quality supplements are a little complicated to get without an appointment. So, yeah. So, and then the second question was about the ketogenic diet long term. Yeah. Again, I think that there have probably been humans who have lived their entire life in ketosis. Like, I think about the Eskimos who live mostly on the blubber of animals. Like, they weren't eating a lot of carbohydrates. Were they exposed to the things that we're exposed to every day? I don't know, right? Like, I've heard, and this is just something I heard, but I don't know, maybe it's true, that humans in today's world are exposed to the same number of toxic chemicals that our grandparents or great grandparents were exposed to in their entire life. So, does the ketogenic diet give us what we need in order to manage the detoxification that we have to have? Does it give us what we need to manage the stressors in our life? I think being in ketosis is not harmful, because I know humans have done it for all of human history, but humans have never lived in the complicated environment that we live in now. So I don't feel like I have a super great answer for that. But I think that with the right clinician, you can be tracking your health to make sure that you're not doing any damage, right? Like, you could be, making sure that things are, your cholesterol numbers are steady. Like, it depends on what people are concerned about with the ketogenic diet long term. But I've seen some amazing cholesterol numbers and heart health numbers of people who are on the ketogenic diet. It's truly astonishing. They don't look like the standard American diet numbers at all. They're much lower in most cases. So it's kind of cool.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
Super cool. Well, does anyone else have any more questions? I know we had a bunch in there. And lots of people are saying, and I just got a couple messages separately saying, thank you so much. That was wonderful, really great information. And so again, best way to reach you.
thewellnessrn.com.
Okay. And they can find that easily by typing it into your browser. And then, there's one more says, I am a meat and potatoes kind of guy who is not used to eating from the garden. Flavor king, and I am in need of recipes that make good foods taste good instead of bad foods tasting so good. Good place to start for recipes was the question.
I think I would just type in whole30.com or Whole30 approved recipes. The Whole30 is a Whole Foods diet that you can look at online. I'm not suggesting that you have to do that, but the Whole30 is a diet that allows you to make really whole foods taste good. There are a gazillion recipes out there. All of them are whole food. They're no grains, no dairy, no legumes. What else is, anyway, it's a fantastic, no sugar. It's a fantastic diet for whole foods. And because it's been so popular, there's a gazillion different recipes out there if you type in Whole30 compliant recipes.
That's usually a nice safe place to start, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, wonderful. That is just awesome. Thank you so much, Heather, for doing this. And thank you, everybody who came. I know there was quite a few folks on here that it was fun to see everybody jump in, listen, participate, ask any questions. Oh, we got another thank you. So you guys are so welcome. And Heather, thank you again for your time for doing
Thank you, Ellen, for setting this up and letting me talk. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. Well, if you guys have any further questions for Heather, reach out to her. As you can tell, this is just like the tip of the iceberg for her. And she loves to talk about this stuff. She's a wealth of information, and you should go check out any of your questions with her. It says, "This is my first online event with a knowledgeable person like yourself. Thanks so much for the time and education." Yeah, she's pretty awesome, right? Yeah, she's amazing. So thank you, everybody. Go see Heather if you've got more questions or you want her to start helping you on your own health journey. But thank you so much for being here, everyone. Have a great day. Stay safe out there.
Thank you, Ellen.